The whole town mocked the veteran's bizarre round cabin until the tornado came and nearly every conventional house in its path was torn apart. On a quiet Montana afternoon, the sky turned a sickly green. The air went still and a sound like a distant roar echoed through the valley. Nathan Hale, a veteran chasing peace, felt the ground tremble beneath his boots, while his loyal K9, Ranger, pushed him toward the strange round cabin. Everyone had laughed at it. Today, that cabin would decide who lived. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. The first warning Nathan Hale noticed wasn't the wind itself, it was Ranger. The German shepherd froze before the front steps of the circular cabin, muscles braced, ears rigid, staring into the timberline as if something ancient had just stepped between the trees. Nathan felt the shift in the air. A heartbeat later, a pressure change that pressed against his chest the way a memory sometimes does. Sudden, unwanted, heavy. He stepped onto the porch, boots crunching the thin crust of snow. The mountains around him, usually humming with distant wildlife or the whisper of pine needles, had gone still, not silent. Still like the whole Bitterroot Range was holding its breath. Ranger growled low and rolling, standing halfway between Nathan and the frozen clearing. His hackles lifted, his stance widened. The dog's entire body said one thing: something was wrong. Nathan knew better than to ignore that. Ranger had pulled him out of enough close calls overseas. Crumbling walls in a sandstorm, a collapsing storage tent during a night raid. Even the moment they both dove out of a Humvee seconds before it rolled. The dog never overreacted. He sensed things Nathan often missed. A faint tremor shivered through the ground beneath Nathan's boots. Not an earthquake, not a truck on a distant road. It was too steady, too alive. He stepped farther into the open, eyes narrowing at the horizon. Then the wind spoke. Not the high whistle of winter wind slipping through trees, not the low, hollow moan of drafts curling around mountains. This was different, deep, resonant, grinding as if the sky itself was clearing its throat. The sound vibrated through the ground, up his legs, into his spine, the same way artillery shockwaves used to travel through the sand overseas. His breath caught, his shoulders tightened. For a moment, he wasn't in Montana. He was back in uniform, crouched behind a barricade of sandbags, waiting for the next detonation. Ranger barked sharply, snapping him out of it. Nathan exhaled, grounding himself with the cold air and the familiar winter smell of pine and woods. "Easy, buddy," he murmured, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Ranger didn't ease. His eyes tracked the ridge ahead. That was when Nathan saw it. A line of green, sickly, unnatural, glowing faintly beneath the heavy winter clouds. Not the soft green of auroras, not the thin green of sunset. This was denser, darker, as if someone had brushed the sky with the same color he once saw right before a desert storm took out half his forward team. His stomach tightened. He took a step toward the ridge to get a better view, but Ranger lunged forward, blocking him. The dog barked once, urgent, then grabbed Nathan's coat sleeve with his teeth, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to make a point, and yanked him back toward the cabin. "Ranger. Hey. What's gotten into you?" Another tremor rolled beneath their feet. The wind deepened, the grinding now layered with a moan that wavered like a distant siren. The air temperature seemed to drop all at once. Nathan's breath fogged in front of him faster, thicker. Ranger tugged again, harder this time, nearly pulling Nathan off balance. All right, Nathan breathed. "We're going." The dog released his sleeve, but didn't wait. He sprinted toward the cabin door, barking sharply over his shoulder as if ordering Nathan to move. Nathan followed, glancing once more at the green-tinted horizon. His chest clenched in a way he hadn't felt in years. A cold, sinking certainty that something was coming, something that didn't belong in a Montana winter, something he couldn't yet name. The wind growled again. Ranger barked, and Nathan Hale stepped into his cabin with a feeling he thought he'd left on the battlefield. It was the moment before everything changed. But 4 months earlier, nothing felt like it was changing at all. Back then, the Bitterroot Valley had been a place of quiet mornings and long shadows stretching across the tree line. Nathan arrived with everything he owned piled into the back of an old Chevy. 2 duffel bags, a footlocker from his last deployment, and Ranger sitting proudly in the passenger seat like he owned the truck. The mountains had felt like a sanctuary then, A place where the noise in his head quieted just enough for him to breathe without flinching. Montana was supposed to be a fresh start. Supposed to be. The first week, locals treated him kindly enough. A few polite nods at the general store. A warm, "How are you settling in?" from folks who meant well. But when Nathan started clearing land for a round foundation, perfectly circular, 24 feet across, measured with military precision, the questions began. Then the rumors. Then the laughter. It didn't help that he worked alone, sun up to sundown, with Ranger pacing the perimeter like a sentry. Nathan didn't join town dinners or weekend cookouts. He didn't drink beer at the bar or chat at the feed store. He kept to himself the way the military had trained him to do when the world around him felt unstable. Earl Dawson, his nearest neighbor, had been the first to say it out loud. Boys cracked. Earl muttered at the trading post, loud enough for Nathan to hear from across the aisle. Been home from the war a month and already building a giant soup can. Nathan kept loading tools into his basket. Another man chuckled. That ain't a house. That's a grain silo with a front door. Ranger, sensing the tone, stepped in front of Nathan, positioning himself between the men and his handler. The dog didn't growl. He didn't need to. His presence alone made the laughter thin out. "Hey now," Earl said, lifting his hands. "Ain't no harm done, just talking." But it didn't stop. Every day, someone had something to say about the roundhouse. Kids riding bikes slowed down to stare. Drivers passing by rolled their windows down to get a better look. Nathan heard whispers floating across the road. "Can't build corners. That must be a war thing. Man lost too many screws overseas. Dog's the smart one of the pair." Nathan ignored them mostly. Ranger didn't. The dog's ears drooped when someone shouted from a passing truck. He stuck close to Nathan whenever strangers approached, nudging his leg as if asking whether he should intervene. They didn't understand what the round cabin meant. They didn't know where the design came from, or why Nathan had nightmares of square buildings collapsing inward like cardboard under pressure. They hadn't seen what he'd seen beneath violent skies halfway across the world. Every curve of the cabin walls was a memory. Every log he bent was a lesson learned under fire. Every beam he sunk into the ground was a promise to himself. Never again. Still, the laughter kept coming. One evening, as Nathan hoisted a support beam into place, Ranger suddenly stiffened. The dog bolted toward the road, barking sharply. Nathan dropped the beam and sprinted after him, calling out, "Ranger! Heel!" Ranger didn't listen. He raced toward a trio of teenagers who had stopped their dirt bikes at the end of the driveway. They weren't threatening, just curious, but their mocking tone carried across the cool autumn air. "Hey, soldier boy," one of them called. "You building a moon base?" Another snickered. "Looks like a donut. You sleeping in a donut?" Ranger barked again, positioning himself between Nathan and the boys. His body was low, tense, not aggressive, but protective in a way that left no doubt. The boys suddenly fell quiet. "Easy," Nathan said, placing a calming hand on Ranger's collar. "He won't hurt you." One kid gulped. "We were just joking, sir." "Then joke from the road," Nathan replied evenly. The boys sped off without another word. Ranger stayed pressed against Nathan's leg long after they were gone, refusing to move until Nathan himself did. Later that night, the two of them sat beside the half-built frame of the cabin. The stars stretched deep and bright overhead, the kind of sky Nathan never saw during deployment. Ranger rested his head on Nathan's boot, eyes closed, but ears twitching every now and then at distant sounds. An owl, a shifting tree, a branch falling somewhere in the dark. Nathan rubbed the dog's ear gently. "They don't get it, buddy. But that's all right. We're used to people not getting it." Ranger let out a soft groan, the kind he made when he wanted Nathan to know he understood. Nathan smiled faintly at that. But the next morning proved how quickly things could turn. Nathan was tightening a joint beam high on the new cabin frame when he heard the sharp crack of wood behind him. He twisted just in time to see a heavy support bar tipping toward him. His body reacted before his brain caught up, years of training snapping to life. But before he could leap, Ranger barreled into him with full force. The beam smashed into the dirt exactly where Nathan had been standing. Nathan hit the ground hard. The breath knocked from his chest. Ranger limped backward, his paw dragging slightly, a pained whine slipping out. "Ranger!" Nathan scrambled to him, running hands through the dog's fur until he found the source. A splinter lodged near the pad of Ranger's foot. Blood seeped slowly. It wasn't dangerous, but it was enough to make the dog wince. "You saved my life," Nathan whispered, his forehead pressed to the dog's. Again, Ranger licked his chin, trying to stand tall, even on an injured leg. Nathan carried him inside, cleaned and wrapped the wound with a gentleness that surprised even himself. The dog didn't fight him. He just watched Nathan with steady, trusting eyes. The same look he had given him during the worst nights overseas. Outside, faint laughter drifted from the distant road again. Someone must have driven by. Someone must have seen the fallen beam. Someone probably said, "See, told you that house was trouble." Nathan's jaw clenched. He didn't care about their jokes anymore, but he cared about the dog who had just taken a hit for him again. And he cared about the growing sense that the cabin wasn't just a project. It was preparation for something he couldn't yet name. But Ranger seemed to feel it, too. As dusk bled into the valley, Nathan touched the curved frame of the unfinished cabin. A breeze whispered across the clearing, normal, gentle. But the man, who had survived more storms than he cared to count, felt something else beneath it. Something waiting, something coming. And this time, it wasn't just in his head. Nathan woke before sunrise the next morning, not because of an alarm, but because that same quiet sense of wrongness had lodged itself deep in his chest. It was the same feeling he used to get during deployment. The kind that whispered before the radios did, before the commanding officers did, before anything visible gave a clue. A feeling that danger was already moving, just not close enough for anyone else to notice. Ranger limped out from behind the wood stove as soon as Nathan sat up, the dog hobbling on 3 legs, but refusing to stay still. He followed Nathan to the door, nudging it with his nose until Nathan opened it. A wash of cold morning air swept in, sharp, metallic, and strange in a way Nathan couldn't define. "Easy," Nathan whispered, kneeling to check Ranger's bandage. "You need rest." Ranger didn't care. His eyes were locked on the half-built frame outside. Nathan followed his gaze. The circular skeleton of the cabin stood in the pale light like a monument from another time. Clean arcs of timber bending into perfect curvature. The groundwork for a structure that made no sense to anyone except him. But every line, every angle, every curve had a reason. A reason pulled from somewhere Nathan never wanted to revisit. He stepped outside, boots crunching through the thin snow, and Ranger hobbled after him. Nathan rested a hand on the cold wood, letting his fingers trace the curve. The memory hit him hard and fast. A desert sky darkening too quickly, sand rising in pillars like ghosts clawing upward. A radio crackling with half-words drowned by wind, shouting, a sudden collapse of a wall. And Ranger, smaller than, younger, slamming into Nathan's side, knocking him out of the path of falling debris. Nathan closed his eyes and inhaled, letting the memory play out, but stopping it before it reached the part he couldn't handle. The part where he wasn't fast enough to save the others. The part where he dug through collapsed tents with his bare hands until they bled. The part where the wind roared over him like it was laughing. He shook the thought loose and went back inside. In the footlocker at the edge of the room, beneath layers of gear and field manuals, sat a weathered binder. Nathan lifted it carefully, setting it on the table. Ranger lay beside him, head resting on Nathan's boot. Inside the binder were drawings, hand-sketched diagrams, measurements, structural calculations. Some were Nathan's, some were from a refugee engineer he had worked with overseas. Together, they'd studied how wind moved across surfaces, how round structures dispersed force better than square ones, how buildings with corners became targets, while buildings with curves let violent winds slide past. It wasn't military work. It was survival work. And it had stuck with him. Nathan flipped a page. A sketch stared back at him. A circular hut drawn in blue ink, beams marked with arrows showing wind flow, notes scribbled in a rushed hand. He remembered the man who'd drawn it. Older, quiet, brilliant in a way that didn't fit the battlefield. Nathan swallowed hard. "You were right," he murmured to the memory. "Corners fail, curves endure." Ranger whined softly, rubbing his head against Nathan's leg. Nathan smiled faintly and scratched Ranger's ear. "You remember too, huh?" Ranger's eyes softened as if he did. Nathan closed the binder and carried it outside, placing it on a crate beside the circular frame. The wind whispered through the trees, not the strange voice from before, but enough to make the pages flutter. Nathan tightened his jaw. "This cabin isn't for show," he said quietly. "It's our shelter, our fallback, our last line of defense." Ranger touched his nose to the wood frame, almost as if he agreed. Nathan spent the rest of the morning repairing the fallen beam and reinforcing the areas he'd been meaning to double-check. Every strike of the hammer echoed through the valley. Every pull of a strap or bolt felt like sealing a promise. Ranger stayed close, watching with those steady eyes he always had during missions. Even injured, the dog never once went inside. By noon, the cold sharpened, and Nathan paused when he noticed frost forming unusually thick along the unfinished roofline. The sun was out. There shouldn't have been frost. Not like that. He stood still for a moment, breath steaming in the cold air. The atmosphere felt tight again, like a drumhead stretched too thin. Ranger's ears flicked toward the eastern ridge. He didn't growl this time, but his body tensed in quiet alarm. Nathan followed the dog's line of sight. Clouds were stacking in odd layers, long and flat, pressed together like pages of a book. He had seen skies like that once, just hours before the desert storm that had changed everything. Before walls fell, before lives were lost, before Ranger dragged him out from under wreckage. A chill ran the length of Nathan's spine. He put a hand on the dog's back. "You feel it, too." Ranger leaned into him as if to say yes. Nathan drew a slow breath and returned to the binder, flipping through the diagrams again. The circular support beams, the reinforced joints, the curved door frame, everything designed to handle pressure, impact, force from all directions. He didn't build this cabin to be different. He built it because he had already lived through what everyone else said was impossible. But here in Montana, so far from the desert, something about the air told him the impossible wasn't finished with him yet. As the wind picked up, brushing through the trees, the strange rising tremor, Ranger stepped closer, leaning against Nathan's side. Nathan didn't push him away. He stared into the shifting sky, and for the first time since he'd returned home, he wasn't thinking about the war behind him. He was thinking about the storm ahead. By the time the clouds pressed low over the valley that afternoon, the unfinished circular cabin stood like an odd monument against the landscape, its curved skeleton rising from the snow, while every other house in the Bitterroot Valley held the same square, familiar lines. The contrast was so sharp it drew attention from anyone who passed, which meant it drew attention from Earl Dawson. Nathan heard the crunch of boots long before the pound appeared. Ranger stiffening at his side with a low warning growl. Earl trudged up the slope with his worn jacket half-zipped, hands stuffed in his pockets, and a look on his face like he was marching up to inspect a crime scene. "Well, well," Earl said as he reached the clearing. "Still building that thing?" Nathan didn't answer. His focus was on the wooden arcs he had set the night before, ensuring they were aligned despite the cold. He didn't need Earl's approval. He didn't want it. Earl, of course, mistook silence for invitation. "I swear, Hale, if I didn't know better, I'd think you were planning to hide from aliens in that contraption." Ranger stepped between them, ears pinned back, muscles coiled with the same instinct that once kept Nathan alive in places far from these quiet mountains. Earl raised his eyebrows. "And there's the mud again. Can't say hello without him trying to tear into somebody." Nathan stopped what he was doing and faced Earl fully. "He's warning you to stop crossing my fence line without permission." Earl snorted. "Fence line ain't no fence. Just your imagination. And that dog's temper." The tension sharpened like a blade. Nathan could feel Ranger's heartbeat through the dog's body, steady but ready. Always ready. Nathan rested a hand on Ranger's neck to calm him, but he didn't look home from Earl. "Say what you came to say," Nathan said quietly. Earl rocked back on his heels. "Fine. Folks in town are talking. They're thinking maybe it's time someone told you the truth." He jerked a thumb toward the cabin frame. "This here ain't normal. No one builds a roundhouse up here, not unless they're trying to make some kind of statement." Nathan didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he returned to adjusting the frame, running his hand along the smooth curve he'd spent hours shaping. Earl huffed. "And what's with the curves anyway? Houses need corners, Hale. Always have been that way since my granddaddy settled here." Nathan finally spoke. "Corners fail under pressure." Earl blinked, confused. "Pressure? What pressure? Winter wind? Snow? You build a regular house, you don't get problems. Nathan kept his attention on the wood. Not every storm is regular. For a moment, Earl didn't know what to say. Then he scoffed. You really are cracked, aren't you? Should have stayed wherever the army put you. Out here, we don't do things the weird way. Ranger growled again, deeper this time. Earl stepped back. Yeah, I'm going. Just thought someone ought to tell you what we all think. Nathan didn't answer, and Earl turned away with a muttered curse, heading back toward the scrubby pine trail that led downhill. Ranger didn't relax until the man disappeared. Nathan let out a slow breath. He hadn't realized he was holding. It's all right, he said softly, scratching behind Ranger's ear. He doesn't understand. Ranger nudged him, as if saying no one does. Work resumed, the scrape of tools and the slow rhythm of hammer strikes filling the cold air. Snowflakes drifted down, light but steady. Nathan wrapped fresh bandages around Ranger's paw before climbing the ladder again. By evening, the curved walls stood tall enough to form the beginnings of the cabin's round silhouette, strong, smooth, and unbroken. When the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, the structure caught the last rays of light and glowed faintly gold like the frame of a giant lantern. Kids on bikes slowed down again. Drivers rolled their windows down. People laughed in that way that wasn't truly mean, just ignorant. They didn't see the hidden anchors beneath the dirt or the reinforced joints, or the angled roof beams designed to channel force into the ground instead of catching wind like sails. The cabin wasn't weird. It was engineered. That night, Nathan and Ranger settled inside the half-built circle, resting against one of the finished interior beams, while the fire crackled in a metal ring. Snow fell thicker outside, but the curved walls sheltered the air inside the circle, keeping it oddly warmer. Nathan exhaled softly, leaning back, letting the familiar curve behind him support his shoulders. He thought about the folks in town, their jokes, their sideways glances, their unspoken belief that he was fragile or broken or unstable. He didn't blame them. Not really. They didn't know what he'd seen. They didn't know wind could kill like fear, or that a sky could turn green in the dead of afternoon. They didn't know how fast a life could vanish under falling debris. Ranger slowly rested his head on Nathan's thigh, letting out a low sigh. You remember, Nathan whispered. Ranger's ears twitched. You always remember. The dog lifted his head suddenly, eyes narrowing toward the open doorway. A heartbeat later, Nathan heard it too. A distant creak like a branch snapping, then a faint shuffle of footsteps beyond the snow. Ranger shot to his feet despite his injury, planting himself between Nathan and the dark opening. A silhouette moved outside. Someone approaching the build site. Nathan rose slowly, stepping forward. The figure emerged from the trees. Just a deer. Ranger relaxed, but only slightly. The dog stayed alert even after the animal wandered off. Nathan knelt and pulled him close. Good boy. You did what you were trained to do. Ranger pressed his forehead into Nathan's chest, trembling faintly from the long day and the injury. Nathan held him for a long moment. Out in the dark, the wind shifted again, brushing across the circular frame with a strange sliding sound, like it didn't know how to grip it. Nathan felt a chill crawl along his spine. The storm wasn't here yet, but every instinct told him it was getting closer. When it arrived, the valley might not be ready. Nathan and Ranger had to be. The next days unfolded with a strange heaviness, as if the entire valley was sitting under a sky that hadn't decided what it wanted to do yet. The snow didn't fall normally. It drifted in swirling, uneasy patterns, carried by winds that came from the wrong direction. Ranger felt it before Nathan did. He always did. Each morning, the dog prowled the perimeter of the circular cabin, nose to the ground, tail stiff, ears flicking toward noises Nathan couldn't hear. He dug at the soil beside the support beams, scraping away frozen dirt as though trying to uncover something hidden underneath. Nathan tried to stop him at first, but Ranger refused to listen, his instincts stronger than any command. You're acting like we're back overseas, Nathan murmured one afternoon as Ranger sniffed frantically around the base of the cabin. There's nothing here but wind and snow. But the dog didn't relax, not even for a heartbeat. The valley watched, too, though not with concern, with amusement. Whenever Nathan drove into town for building supplies, eyes followed him. Folks at the general store gave half smiles, half snickers, nudging each other when he wasn't looking. He heard his name whispered like a rumor drifting through the aisles. That veteran fella still building that roundhouse looks like a circus tent without a roof. Dog's meaner than he is. Nah, he's not mean, just cracked. Nathan didn't react. Years of discipline had taught him that silence was more powerful than arguing. But Ranger reacted for him. Body leaning against Nathan's leg, ears pinned back, tracking every voice. Today was no different. Nathan grabbed a new barometer and a small stack of lumber from the hardware section. The old man behind the counter rang him up, avoiding eye contact until the very end. "You making some kind of weather station now?" the man asked. "Something like that," Nathan replied, sliding his card across. The old man huffed. "Storm season's months away. Not the storms I'm worried about." Outside, the cold bit harder than it should have. Ranger limped slightly on his healing paw as they walked toward the truck, but his gaze never rested. It swept across the horizon again and again, like he expected something to emerge from behind the tree line. Nathan had just opened the truck door when a gray sedan pulled up beside him. A woman stepped out. 50s thick scarf, wind-chapped cheeks. She wasn't a local. Her jacket had the stitched emblem of the National Weather Service. "Excuse me," she called. "You the man building the round cabin up the ridge?" Nathan stiffened. "Who's asking?" "Name's Doctor. Linda Harrow. Heard about your construction from the folks inside." She jerked her thumb back toward the store. "They say you're worried about the wind patterns this month." Nathan didn't answer. Ranger stepped between them, reading her scent, deciding she wasn't a threat. Dr. Harrow continued, lowering her voice. "Look, I know they're laughing, but they're wrong. About one thing." Nathan frowned. "What thing?" She nodded toward the horizon. "The atmosphere here isn't behaving right. Pressure's been dropping at odd times fast. Faster than anything typical for this season." Nathan tightened his grip on the truck door. "You've noticed it too, haven't you?" she asked. Nathan glanced at Ranger, the dog already staring at the sky like he had been waiting for someone to finally say it aloud. "Yes," Nathan said quietly. "I have." "Good." She stepped closer. "Keep an eye on it. And whatever you're building, finish it." Then she climbed back into her car and drove off, leaving a swirl of exhaust and silence behind her. Ranger pressed against Nathan's leg, and Nathan rested a hand on the dog's back. "So, it's not just us," he whispered. They returned home just as the sun dipped behind the peaks. The sky was unsettling again, patches of dull yellow blending with pale green streaks, spreading like bruises across the clouds. The wind was cold but carried a strange warmth beneath it, an impossible mix that made Nathan's skin prickle. Ranger bolted toward the cabin's frame, barking sharply. Nathan hurried after him. "What is it?" he called. Ranger stopped at the far side of the circular structure and began digging again, harder, faster. Dirt flying behind him in frantic bursts. Nathan knelt beside him, brushing away loose soil. Then he heard it, a hum, not from the ground, not from the sky, from the air itself, a faint vibrating tone like metal being bowed at the edges. It grew stronger the longer he listened until the hair on Nathan's arms stood up. He rose slowly, turning toward the wind. It pressed against him in a steady push. Too steady with no gusts, no shifts. Just one long breath, like something building pressure. Ranger growled, staring at the horizon. Nathan reached into his coat, extracted the new barometer, and tapped the face. The needle dropped fast. Too fast. "Impossible," Nathan whispered. "Not today. Not this cold." But the needle kept falling. Ranger barked once, loud and sharp. Nathan swallowed. "This isn't normal weather," he said under his breath. "This is something else." Ranger's body lowered into a defensive stance. His breathing quickened. Nathan knelt beside him, placing both hands on the dog's shoulders, grounding him, but truthfully grounding himself too. "We're going to be ready," he whispered. Voice low and steady. "Whatever this is, we're ready." Ranger leaned into him, trembling but resolute. The valley wind shifted. The hum grew louder. The clouds churned in unnatural spirals. And beneath it all, Nathan heard the same deep, muffled sound he had heard once in the desert. The sound that came minutes before the storm that changed his life forever. It was the sound of a sky preparing to break. And this time he wasn't imagining it. Ranger wasn't either. By the following afternoon, the sky over Bitterroot Valley no longer looked like Montana. It didn't look like anywhere on Earth Nathan had ever known. A strange green stain seeped across the clouds, muted at first, then vivid, then unsettling in a way that made Nathan's palms sweat. Ranger felt it long before the color fully settled. The dog clung close to Nathan's leg as they walked the ridge behind the cabin, his body shaking, ears pinned flat. He wasn't whining, he wasn't panicking, he was bracing. Ranger only did that when he sensed something bigger than them, something neither training nor instinct could outrun. Nathan paused beside a cluster of leafless aspens and scanned the horizon. Bitterroot's jagged peaks were swallowed in layers of cloud that stacked in unnatural, evenly spaced lines like someone had rad their fingers through the sky. No breeze touched Nathan's cheeks. No sound moved through the pines. The valley was utterly still. Too still. Where are the birds? Nathan murmured. Normally, even in cold months, a few ravens patrolled the treetops. Jays screeched. Squirrels chattered like tiny, angry machines. Today, nothing. Not even the faintest rustle of branches. Ranger pressed against his leg, trembling harder now. Nathan knelt and placed both hands around the dog's ruff, steady and slow. Easy, boy. I'm right here. Ranger's breath came fast, visible in the cold air. Nathan looked back at the sky. The green deepened, tinted with a pale yellow glow that made the snow appear bruised. He remembered this color from one place only, the desert. The day the sky went wrong. The day the storm arrived early. The day he lost men who trusted him. He squeezed his eyes shut, pushing the memory away. Not now. Not here. A sudden shift in the air made him open his eyes again. It wasn't a breeze, it was pressure. Dense, heavy, almost tangible. It wrapped around him with the same crushing grip he felt during explosions overseas, where sound was sucked away before the blast reached them. The silence hit him like a weight. No birds, no trees squeaking, no distant rumble of a truck on the dirt road, just quiet, thick and absolute. Ranger whined a thin, frightened sound Nathan had rarely heard from him. Nathan rose slowly. Let's head back. They moved carefully down the slope. Ranger glued to Nathan's side. The cabin's curved frame glowed faintly in the strange green light, its rounded beams reflecting colors in a way square houses couldn't. Nathan felt a chill run through him as he approached it. Not from cold, but from recognition. The cabin's design, the curves, the angles felt suddenly less like a choice and more like an instinct. Something his mind had pushed him toward long before logic caught up. The atmosphere thickened again. Nathan checked the barometer he'd clipped to his belt. The needle was falling hard. He tapped it. The needle dropped again. Not possible, he whispered. Pressure this low in winter. Ranger barked sharply, then bolted straight for the cabin, limping on his injured paw, but moving with urgent purpose. Nathan ran after him. By the time Nathan reached the frame, Ranger was already inside the circular structure, staring out toward the valley's main road. Nathan followed his gaze. Far in the distance, a pickup truck slowed on the road, the driver poking his head out as if trying to make sense of the unnatural sky. Another car stopped beside it. People stepped out, pointing upward. The wind still refused to blow. Nathan felt sweat prick the back of his neck despite the freezing air. He had seen calm like this once before, a quiet that came right before the world tore open. A moment when the sky warned anyone paying attention. Ranger barked again, quick, frantic, almost a shout. Nathan turned. More townspeople were stepping out of their homes in the valley below. Some shading their eyes, some recording the sky with their phones. Some laughing nervously like people do when the world is about to give them a lesson they aren't ready for. Nathan raised a hand instinctively and whispered, "Get inside. Get to safety." The words disappeared into the air like they weren't allowed to travel. He hurried back into the cabin frame, moving from beam to beam, checking every support joint, tightening straps, reinforcing the alignment. His pacing grew more urgent as the pressure continued to plunge. Ranger followed him with quick, tight steps, unable to stay still. A low hum rolled across the sky. Nathan froze. Ranger lowered himself to the ground, belly pressed to the dirt, tail tucked tight, ears flat. The hum deepened. The green sky thickened, swirling slowly, unnaturally, like something heavy was descending behind the clouds. Nathan whispered, "No, no, not here, not now." But the sky didn't care. Ranger scrambled suddenly to the doorway, barking fiercely at the valley below, at the people stepping outside without fear, at the homes with square corners, corners Nathan knew were weak, corners that gave wind places to grab and tear. "Ranger, hey, come here." But the dog barked louder, as if pleading with someone far away. Nathan stepped to his side and looked down at the village again. He felt sick. All those houses, all those corners, all those families that had left, all those people with no idea how fast a storm could move. The air grew colder, then warmer, then colder again. The hum deepened into a growl. Nathan whispered, voice breaking, "This is the exact sky." Ranger nudged him with his head, a trembling push that snapped Nathan out of the memory. He squared his shoulders. "All right," he breathed. "We finish. We brace. We prepare." Ranger whimpered, but stood tall beside him. Nathan tightened the final support beam, hands shaking from the cold and fear he refused to acknowledge. Just before dusk, the pressure plunged one more time. The barometer needle slammed to the bottom of the gauge. Nathan stared at it in stunned disbelief. And in the same breath, Ranger's body went rigid. Not barking, not growling, silent, listening, waiting. The terrible quiet deepened until Nathan could hear his own heartbeat. Then Ranger turned his head toward the mountains and let out a long, mournful howl, a sound Nathan had never heard from him. Not in the desert, not in storms, not even when they lost men overseas. A sound that meant only one thing. The sky wasn't sick. It was warning them. And the storm wasn't coming someday. It was coming now. The first sign wasn't the wind. It was the absence of it. Nathan had lived through the kind of storms that ripped tents out of the ground and turned steel into shrapnel. He knew what wind sounded like when it wanted to kill. But this breathless, crushing stillness, this was worse. It was the moment just before the world exhaled, all at once. Ranger sensed it first. The dog bolted from the doorway of the circular cabin, barking with a frantic urgency Nathan had never heard from him. His injured paw barely touched the ground as he sprinted toward the ridge overlooking the valley. Nathan followed, heart hammering, boots slipping in the thin snow as he climbed the slope. When he reached the top, he froze. A black column had formed in the distance. Not gray, not silver. Not the dusty brown of a desert twister. Black, like a piece of the night sky, had been torn loose and was spinning violently out of control. The clouds above it churned toward the ground in twisting shapes, each one lit from within by flashes of pale, sick yellow light. The green from the earlier sky clung to the horizon like a bruise, spreading wider with each passing second. The tornado wasn't forming. It was formed. And it was already moving. "Oh God," Nathan whispered. Ranger barked at the valley again, desperate, furious, warning anyone who would listen. But the people below didn't understand what they were seeing. Some stepped onto porches staring like spectators. Some stood in yards filming the sky on their phones. Some laughed in disbelief. No one ran. Nathan cupped his hands and yelled through the cold air, "Get inside. Get inside now." But his voice didn't carry far enough, smothered by the pressure rising from the storm. He watched in horror as the black funnel widened 300 yards across, maybe more. It moved faster than any storm had a right to move, cutting across the valley like a living thing hunting for breath. Ranger whined, pawing at Nathan's leg, trying to drag him backward to the cabin to shelter anywhere but here. Nathan's instincts screamed the same thing, but his heart ached for the valley below. The first house in its path, a small A-frame with a rust-red roof, exploded in silence. Its roof ripped clean off, torn away like paper by a force invisible from this distance. Boards flew upward in spirals, swallowed by the funnel before Nathan could even blink. Ranger barked sharply, almost as if crying out in grief. Nathan grabbed the dog by the harness. "We have to go now." They sprinted downhill, snow spraying behind them. Ranger limped but didn't slow. He pushed ahead, leading Nathan straight toward the circular cabin. The wind still hadn't arrived, but the ground trembled with a low, rolling vibration that made every step feel unstable. Nathan fumbled with the round door, the wooden curve fitting inside its frame like a giant puzzle piece. He shoved it open, practically throwing Ranger inside. The dog skidded across the dirt floor, spun, then planted himself in the doorway, barking at Nathan with frantic urgency. "I'm right behind you," Nathan shouted. He slammed the door shut just as the first gust of wind hit. The sound that followed wasn't a roar. It was 1,000 roars layered together. A freight train, a jet engine, a collapsing building, all of it at once, vibrating through the cabin walls with a force Nathan felt in his teeth. Ranger shoved his body against the door, using every ounce of strength in his injured legs to brace it. The wood rattled violently, the round hinges creaking under the strain. Nathan sprinted across the cabin and dropped to his knee beside Ranger, adding his weight to the door. "Hold it!" Nathan yelled. Though the storm swallowed his voice whole, the cabin shuddered. The curved walls groaned. Dust rained from the ceiling as the storm rammed into the structure from the southwest. Nathan felt the pressure in his ears spike, sharp and painful like needles driving inward. Ranger yelped once, but didn't move from the door. Nathan wrapped an arm around the dog's chest, holding him steady as the cabin shook like it was trapped inside the throat of some terrible beast. A deafening crack echoed outside. Then another. Then another. The storm was tearing through the valley, ripping apart homes Nathan had driven past for months. He clenched his jaw, eyes stinging, knowing he couldn't help them now. The tornado slammed into the cabin's north side, and the entire building lurched, but it held. The curved walls pushed the wind aside, redirecting pressure around the structure instead of catching it head-on. The beams Nathan had bent with steam didn't splinter. They flexed, absorbing the force. But the storm changed direction again, hitting harder. Nathan's fingers dug into Ranger's fur. "Hold on, buddy. Hold on." A loose ember from the fire ring snapped upward, carried by sudden reverse pressure. Sparks flew across the cabin floor. Ranger barked at them, then squeezed his body tighter against the door. Nathan's ears popped violently as the air pressure plummeted. The sound became muffled like cotton stuffed inside his skull. His heartbeat pounded louder than the storm. For a moment, just a moment, Nathan felt the weight of the desert again, felt the sand hitting his helmet, felt the walls collapsing, heard Ranger barking, younger, pulling him from the rubble. "No," he gasped, fighting the old memory. "Not now. Stay here. Stay here." The ground beneath them vibrated harder, then everything stopped. Not slowly, not gently. It stopped all at once like the world had inhaled sharply and wasn't sure if it wanted to breathe out again. Nathan didn't move. Ranger didn't either. The two of them stayed braced against the door, waiting, listening, hardly daring to breathe. Outside, only silence. Broken, eerie, final. Nathan slowly lifted his head. He could hear Ranger panting, exhausted, trembling, but steady, loyal to the end. Nathan rested his forehead against the dog's back. "We made it," he whispered. He didn't know yet what waited outside, but he knew one thing. If they hadn't built the cabin the way they had, if they hadn't followed the instincts formed halfway across the world, if Ranger hadn't dragged him inside, they wouldn't be alive to see the aftermath. Nathan swallowed hard, chest tight. "The storm's passed," he said softly. But even before he touched the doorknob, he sensed the painful truth. The world outside wasn't going to look the same. Nathan's hand hovered over the curved wooden handle, fingers trembling from adrenaline and the pressure that had battered the cabin from every direction. Ranger pressed against his leg, panting hard, his chest rising and falling in sharp, shallow bursts. The dog's body still shook, not from fear, but from pure exhaustion. He had thrown himself at the door until the storm finally moved on. "Easy," Nathan whispered, steadying the dog with one hand. "We're alive. That's what matters." He braced himself, inhaled deeply, and pulled the door open. The cold that rushed inside didn't feel like mountain cold. It felt hollow, empty, as if the storm had sucked every ounce of warmth from the valley. Ranger crept forward first, head low, sniffing cautiously before stepping out onto the flattened earth. Nathan followed, his breath caught in his throat. The world he stepped into wasn't Bitterroot Valley anymore. It was a wasteland carved by wind and violence. Every inch of snow had been ripped clean. The trees nearest his cabin had been stripped bare, branches gone, bark peeled away, trunks twisted like they were made of soft metal instead of wood. And the homes, God, the homes. Where rows of familiar cabins once stood, square, simple, neatly placed, they were gone. Not destroyed, not collapsed, gone, erased. The storm had scrubbed the land down to soil as if someone had dragged a colossal blade across the valley floor. Only splintered fragments remained. Boards slammed into tree trunks like thrown spears. Bits of insulation tangled in fences, half buried in mud. A roof panel crumpled like paper 100 yards away from where it once belonged. Nathan swallowed hard, heart sinking. He had known the tornado was coming. He had sensed it. Ranger had sensed it even earlier, but he never imagined this. Ranger let out a soft whine and pressed against Nathan's leg, not seeking comfort, but offering it. Nathan rested a trembling hand on the dog's back. "It was 47 seconds, he murmured. His voice cracked thin. That's all it took. He wasn't exaggerating. He knew the exact rhythm of disaster. He had counted seconds during explosions, counted breaths during ambushes, counted heartbeats between decisions that changed everything. He had counted the storm to 47 seconds from the moment it hit the cabin until the world fell silent again. 47 seconds to erase an entire community. Ranger tensed suddenly, ears snapping forward. Nathan followed the dog's gaze. A piece of wall, once a part of Earl Dawson's porch, lay twisted at the base of a small pine. Beyond it, faint trails of mud showed where debris had been dragged by the tornado's suction. Nathan heard nothing at first, then something faint, fragile, a cry. Not loud, not clear, but unmistakable. He sprinted forward, Ranger limping fast at his side. They moved through the wreckage, if it could even be called wreckage, following the sound as it grew louder. A whimper, a moan, someone calling for help in a thin, broken voice. Nathan spotted movement beneath a collapsed storage shed panel. Just a flash of cloth and a trembling hand. He dropped to his knees and dug fiercely, tossing aside boards, mud, broken siding. Ranger used his nose to pinpoint the exact location, pawing gently, then stepping back to avoid getting in Nathan's way. Finally, Nathan pulled the panel aside. Earl Dawson lay underneath, face bruised, clothes torn. One arm bent awkwardly, but still alive. Barely. He blinked up at Nathan through dirt and tears, lips cracked, breath thin. You. Earl coughed, gripping Nathan's sleeve. You told us. You warned us. Nathan shook his head fiercely. Don't talk, Earl. Hold on. I've got you. Ranger leaned close, nudging Earl's shoulder carefully, checking for life signs the way he'd been trained during search missions. Earl stared at the dog in disbelief, voice trembling. He saved you, didn't he? That dog saved you? Nathan didn't answer. His throat tightened too much for words. He hauled Earl from the debris, supporting him with one shoulder. Earl cried out from the pain, but he stayed conscious. Ranger limped beside them, never leaving their side. Once Earl was stable against a fallen stump, Nathan scanned the valley again. Nothing stood. Nothing survived except one thing, the circular cabin. Its curved walls were untouched, its round roof still in place. Even the door hinges had held without tearing free. That your damn shelter? Earl whispered, staring in awe. Why is it still standing when everything else ain't? Nathan didn't answer. He was looking at more wreckage, searching for more voices, more movement, more signs of life. And then he heard it. A second cry higher this time. Small. Frightened. Ranger jerked his head toward the sound and barked once. Nathan placed a hand on Earl's shoulder. Stay here. Don't move. He didn't wait for a reply. Ranger led him through shredded fences and shorn earth, his nose low, following the faintest hint of human scent. They reached an overturned pickup truck, skidded on its side, doors crushed inward by pressure. Something moved beneath the truck bed. Nathan crouched, prying aside a bent panel. A child, no more than 8, curled beneath the metal, shaking, covered in dust, but breathing. Nathan exhaled in relief so sharp it hurt. Hey there, he said softly, voice gentle. You're okay. We're going to get you out. Ranger sniffed the child's hand, giving a small whine and licking her fingers in reassurance. The girl's trembling eased at the sight of him. Nathan lifted her carefully, checking her arms and legs for injuries. She clung to his neck. "I couldn't find my mom," she whispered into his coat. "The wind took everything." Nathan swallowed a wave of emotion. "We'll find everyone we can. I promise." Ranger pressed close to Nathan, guiding him as he carried the child back toward the only standing structure in the valley. The only refuge, the only home left, the round cabin. As Nathan approached it, the walls unmarred, the frame steady, the roof untouched, he felt Ranger lean against his leg again, weary but alert. 47 seconds had changed the valley forever, but something else had changed, too. The people who used to laugh, who used to scoff, who used to dismiss him, they no longer had homes to stand on. They only had him and Ranger and the cabin everyone mocked. Nathan tightened his grip on the child in his arms, feeling the cold bite of the air deepen around them. The worst had passed, but the aftermath had only begun. Nathan stood at the doorway of the round cabin, the rescued child clinging weakly to his side, her face buried against his jacket. Ranger pressed close to his other leg, limping but alert, his ears swiveling at every faint sound that rose from the devastated valley. Nathan had barely settled the rescued child inside when Ranger barked once sharply. Nathan turned back toward the valley. "Show me," he said. The dog limped ahead, determined despite the pain in his paw. He led Nathan toward the western edge of the tornado's path, where a pickup truck lay upside down, its tires spinning slowly in the breeze. Ranger sniffed around the cab, then froze, ears forward, body tense. Nathan listened, a faint tapping. Someone was trapped. Someone trapped. He dropped to the ground, braced a knee under the truck's frame, and reached for the twisted door. It didn't budge. He dug his fingers deeper, muscles straining, gritting his teeth until the metal shifted just enough to reveal a pocket of space beneath the seat. Two eyes stared back, terrified, tear-filled. A teenage boy. "Please," the boy whispered. "I'm stuck." Nathan glanced at Ranger. "Stay," he ordered gently, and the dog held position. Then he lifted. Every muscle in his back screamed. But the frame moved an inch. Then two. The boy scrambled out as soon as the gap was wide enough. Nathan collapsed to one knee, breathing hard. Ranger immediately nudged his face, checking him for harm. "I'm good," Nathan panted. "Just tired." He wasn't tired. Not really. He was overwhelmed. The storm had taken so much, too much. And yet here he was again, digging survivors out of collapsed structures, heart pounding with old memories, mind flashing between two worlds. He gathered himself, took the boy's arm, and helped him walk back toward the round cabin. Inside, Earl reached out, pulling the boy into a shaky embrace. "You're okay," Earl whispered. "Thank God you're okay." Nathan stepped back outside, scanning the valley once more. The destruction was total, but faint hints of life lingered. A cry. A cough. Maybe just the wind shifting through debris. Every sound mattered. "Ranger," he said softly. "Let's keep going." The dog limped to his side, determination in his eyes. Together they searched until the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks. They searched until Nathan's fingers were numb, until Ranger's paws trembled under him. They searched until the weight of the valley's silence told them they had done all they could for now. By the time they returned to the circular cabin, 9 more survivors were huddled inside, cold, shaken, but alive. Some were crying. Some stared blankly at the curved walls, whispering prayers of disbelief. Nathan glanced around the cabin at the people clinging to one another, at Ranger collapsing tiredly against the door. This wasn't just a shelter now. It was the last standing home in the valley. And in that moment, Nathan understood the terrible truth. They had survived the storm, but now they had to survive the night. Nathan stepped back inside the round cabin, escorting the last 2 survivors he and Ranger had pulled from the wreckage. The curved walls felt warmer now, not because of the fire, but because human life filled the space again. Children huddled against their parents. Elderly neighbors wrapped themselves in blankets Nathan had stored for winter. Every face showed the same expression, shock mixed with fragile gratitude. But Earl Dawson, he looked different. He sat near the far wall, an emergency blanket across his shoulders, head in his hands. The man who once laughed louder than anyone else now stared at his trembling fingers like he didn't recognize them. When Nathan approached, Earl lifted his face, and the grief in his eyes was deeper than the wounds on his skin. "You saved people," Earl whispered. "I saw you. You and that dog. You dug us out. You carried us here." Nathan didn't respond. He couldn't. Ranger limped to Earl's side and pressed his muzzle into the man's arm. Earl let out a shaky breath, lifting his unsteady hand to rest on the dog's head. "I'm sorry," Earl said suddenly, his voice cracking like old timber. "I'm sorry for every damn word I ever said to you. Thought you were Hal." He swallowed hard. "Thought you were broken. Turns out you were the only one paying attention." Nathan lowered himself into a crouch. "Earl, this isn't the time." "Yes, it is," Earl insisted. Tears streaked through the dirt on his cheeks. "I mocked you because I didn't understand you, because I didn't want to believe a storm like this could ever hit us, and because I was wrong about everything." Ranger licked Earl's hand gently, as if telling him the apology was heard. Nathan felt a knot in his chest tighten. He had spent years learning not to absorb other people's judgments, but Earl's words cut deeper than he expected. Before he could answer, Ranger jerked his head toward the door and let out a short, tense bark. "What is it, boy?" Nathan asked. Ranger limped across the room, nose pressed to the floor, following some faint scent trail. He sniffed his way toward the doorway, then paused, ears forward, body tense. Then Nathan heard it too, a faint cry outside. High, small, a child. Nathan bolted upright, grabbed his coat, and swung the round cabin door open. The cold night air hit him like a wall of ice. Ranger forced himself through the doorway too, dragging his injured paw, but refusing to stay behind. A pale moon hung over the valley, casting harsh silver light across the flattened landscape. The destroyed homes looked even more unreal under the glow. Shadows bent at strange angles, debris scattered like bones of some long-dead creature. Then Ranger barked sharply. Nathan followed him toward an overturned shipping container that the tornado had hurled almost 100 yards. Its heavy metal hull was dented, warped, and half buried in the dirt. Ranger circled one end, whining urgently. Nathan knelt, ear pressed to the cold steel. A weak knock. A child's voice. "Please help." Nathan's pulse surged. "Hang on. I hear you." He shoved his hands beneath the edge of the container, but it barely budged. The thing weighed thousands of pounds. He tried again, muscles screaming, breath fogging in the cold. Nothing. Ranger barked at him, a sharp command. "Yeah," Nathan breathed. "I know. Think." He surveyed the area, scanning for leverage. Nearby, he spotted a fallen tree trunk, long, thick, stripped of branches by the tornado's force. Perfect. He dragged it across the dirt, wedged one end under the container, and braced the other against a mound of debris. Then he positioned himself along the trunk, using every bit of strength he had left. Come on. Come on. The trunk creaked. The container shifted an inch, then another. Ranger shoved his body against Nathan's leg, lending support, growling as if pushing too. With one final surge, Nathan forced the container upward just enough for Ranger to squeeze underneath. "No, Ranger!" Nathan shouted, terrified. "Wait!" But the dog was already inside. Nathan held the trunk with everything he had. His muscles burned, but he didn't dare let go. Inside, Ranger barked once, then again, then emerged, dragging a little girl by her jacket with his teeth. Nathan gasped and dropped to help her just as Ranger backed out. The container slammed back into the dirt with a thunderous thud behind them. The girl coughed and blinked up at Nathan through tears. "I couldn't find my brother." "It's all right," Nathan said, lifting her gently. "You're safe now." Ranger nudged the girl's hand with his muzzle, checking her for injury. She sobbed and wrapped her arms around the dog's neck. Ranger stood still and let her cry into his fur. Nathan carried her back to the cabin. When he stepped inside, the entire room froze. A hush fell. Earl Dawson pushed himself to his knees. Tears streamed again as he stared at the little girl in Nathan's arms and at Ranger beside them. "You too," Earl whispered. "You're saving all of us." The girl clung to Nathan tighter. The survivors who filled the cabin, mothers clutching their children, Elderly neighbors wrapped in blankets, teenagers shaking from shock, looked at the curved walls, then at Nathan, then at Ranger. No one laughed at the round cabin now. No one doubted it. No one doubted them. Nathan lowered the girl into Earl's waiting arms, then collapsed to his knees beside Ranger. He brushed his fingers through the dog's fur, feeling the warmth of his body, the trembling beneath his ribs, the exhaustion in every breath. "You're a hero," Nathan whispered into Ranger's neck. "Every bit of you." Ranger rested his head on Nathan's lap, eyes half closed, but still alert. Always alert, listening for the next cry, the next sign, the next life that needed saving. Outside, the night grew colder. Inside the circular cabin, 23 survivors huddled together, staring at Nathan and Ranger with a mixture of awe, gratitude, something deeper respect. The storm had taken almost everything, but it had revealed one undeniable truth. They were still alive because one man listened when everyone else laughed, and because one dog never stopped protecting him. Night settled over Bitterroot Valley like a shroud. The moon hung low, dimmed by the haze of dust the tornado had thrown into the sky. Inside Nathan's round cabin, 23 survivors gathered in a tight circle close to the fire Nathan had coaxed to life in the center pit. Its glow washed across curved walls that somehow made the room feel safer, warmer, like the storm outside couldn't reach them here. Ranger lay near the entrance, his injured paw tucked beside him, chest rising and falling in slow, tired breaths. Even in his exhaustion, his eyes tracked every movement, every whisper, every crackle of the fire. Nathan knelt beside him, one hand resting on the dog's side, feeling the warmth beneath his fur. "You did good today," Nathan murmured. Ranger lifted his head and nudged Nathan's hand, as if reassuring him that he'd do it all again if he had to. Across the room, Earl Dawson watched them with an expression full of quiet shame and something else, something heavier. Every time he blinked, tears gathered, but he kept brushing them away, trying to hide the rawness on his face. The rescued little girl, her name was Hannah, sat wrapped in a blanket against her father's chest. She hadn't let Ranger leave her sight since the dog pulled her out from under the shipping container. When her small eyes wandered, they always returned to him as though she needed proof he was still there. Nathan stood slowly, stretching the ache from his back. When he walked toward the fire, all conversations hushed. People were waiting for direction, comfort, explanation, anything. Nathan cleared his throat quietly. "The cabin is stable. We're safe for the night," he said, voice low but steady. "The storm's passed, but temperatures are dropping. Stay close to the fire and check on each other." An older woman raised her hand slightly, her voice trembling. "Nathan, how did you know about the storm?" He hesitated, not because he didn't know what to say, but because the truth wasn't easy to relive. Ranger pushed himself up on his good paw and limped to Nathan's side, leaning against his leg. Nathan rested a hand on Ranger's head. "I've seen skies like that before," he said quietly. "Overseas, right before a storm that took out half a base. Pressure dropped, wind changed, light shifted green. And Ranger." He glanced down at the dog. "He felt it before we did, before anyone did." The room fell silent. Nathan's voice softened. "I didn't build this cabin to be strange or to get attention or to scare people." He traced a hand along the curved wall. "I built it because I knew the mountains aren't as predictable as we want them to be, and because I wasn't going to ignore the signs again." Earl's voice cracked from the corner. "We should have listened, folks in town, me especially. We said terrible things about you." Nathan met his eyes but didn't speak. Earl bowed his head. "And now my house is gone, my barn too, everything. If you weren't here, if that dog wasn't with you, half of us wouldn't be alive." A hush washed over the cabin. No one argued. No one questioned. Even children seemed to understand the weight of what Earl said. Nathan lowered himself beside Ranger. Both of them sat near the warm glow of the fire. "We did what anyone would have done." "No," Earl said firmly. "No one else would have run into that storm. No one else would have crawled under trucks or dug through lumber with their bare hands. I watched you pull people out of the dirt like you'd done it 100 times. Nathan's jaw tightened. "I have." Earl froze, but Nathan didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Ranger rested his head on Nathan's knee, eyes fluttering with exhaustion. Nathan ran his fingers through the dog's fur, soothing him. Hannah watched the two of them, then whispered softly, "He saved me." Her father nodded, voice trembling. "He saved all of us." Nathan smiled faintly. "He's been doing that for years. It's just who he is." An elderly man seated near the fire cleared his throat. "Nathan, your home here is the only one that survived. Why? What makes it so different?" Nathan stood and walked to the curved wall, running his hand along the smooth arc. Square walls catch wind. Corners create pressure points. But a curve. He tapped the wood. A curve makes the wind slide past. Even when it tries to grab hold, there's nothing for it to pull. A young mother holding her infant stared at the structure around them. It feels warm, even without insulation. Nathan nodded. Round walls help the heat circulate more evenly. No corners for the chill to hide. The survivors glanced around with new eyes, seeing the cabin as more than a strange structure, seeing it as the reason they were alive. The fire popped loudly, sending sparks upward. The sound made Nathan flinch, reflexively ducking his head. Ranger growled softly and stepped in front of him. Nathan closed his eyes. PTSD had many triggers, but fire crackling in a closed space under a roof that shook during a storm. It took him right back. He steadied himself with a deep breath. "I'm all right," he whispered to Ranger. The dog didn't move. Nathan managed a small smile. "You're not letting me out of your sight, huh?" Ranger lifted a paw to Nathan's knee as if to say "Ver." The night stretched on. Inside the cabin, people talked in soft voices, shared blankets, cried quietly when they thought no one was looking. And every so often, someone's eyes drifted toward Nathan and Ranger, the two figures at the heart of everything that had kept them alive. As dawn approached, a faint pale glow crept across the horizon outside. The survivors slowly drifted into uneasy sleep. Some leaned against the curved walls. Some curled beside the fire. Hannah slept with her hand wrapped in Ranger's fur. Nathan stayed awake. He watched them. He watched Ranger. He watched the slow brightening of the sky through the doorway. And when the first light touched the valley's torn ground, he understood something he hadn't before. This night wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the rebuilding. The beginning of forgiveness. The beginning of understanding. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a place where he and Ranger finally belonged. The morning after the tornado broke over Bitterroot Valley was unlike any morning Nathan had ever seen. The world was washed in a pale, eerie light, the sky still bruised from the storm's passage. A thin mist clung to the ground, drifting among the splintered remains of what had been homes, barns, gardens, lives. But inside the round cabin, something else lingered: hope. Nathan rose slowly, muscles aching from hours of digging, lifting, bracing, carrying. Ranger stood with him, stubbornly pushing weight onto his injured paw, refusing to rest while others still needed him. The dog nudged Nathan toward the door, snout pressed against his leg, as if telling him, "It's time." Nathan opened the round door. A sharp breath escaped him. Dawn revealed the full scale of destruction and the full miracle of survival. His cabin stood untouched, its curved lines gleaming softly in the early morning haze. Around it, flattened foundations stretched like empty footprints in the earth. Yet the clearing around the cabin now brimmed with life, survivors emerging slowly, blinking into the light, whispering in disbelief at what still stood. A mother clutched her sleeping infant. A teenager wrapped an arm around his younger sister. Two elderly neighbors supported each other with trembling hands. They looked at Nathan as though seeing him for the first time. Earl Dawson stepped forward, leaning on a makeshift crutch Nathan had fashioned from a piece of salvaged lumber. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes held something steady, something sincere. "Nathan," Earl said, voice rough, "we can't rebuild Bitterroot the way it was. Not after what we saw. Not after what we lost." He swallowed hard, glancing at the cabin's curved frame. "We want to rebuild like this. Like yours." A murmur spread through the survivors. Nathan wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. "Like mine?" Earl nodded. "Round walls, reinforced beams. Whatever it is you did, we want to learn. We want to build something that can stand up to what nature threw at us last night." Ranger barked once, tail thumping weakly against Nathan's leg. Nathan blinked slowly. I don't know if I'm a teacher. Earl stepped closer. You're the one who saved us. The one who saw the danger coming. The one who built something that didn't just survive. It protected 23 of us through the worst storm this valley's ever seen. Nathan looked away, emotions tightening in his chest. I only did what I had to. I built what I knew. And that's exactly why we need you, Earl said. What you knew saved lives. Ranger pressed his body against Nathan's hip, as if lending him strength. Nathan finally nodded. All right, we'll start together. The survivors breathed out, some in relief, some in awe, some in quiet gratitude that words couldn't carry. As the day warmed, a caravan of emergency vehicles slowly wound its way into the valley. First responders, forestry agents, and hours later, a team from the University of Montana's engineering department. They moved carefully, photographing the path of destruction, whispering among themselves when they reached the unscathed circular cabin. One woman stepped forward, adjusting her glasses. Who designed this structure? Nathan glanced away. Just me. And the dog, Earl added proudly, nudging Ranger lightly with his crutch. Don't forget the dog. The engineers examined every joint, every seam, running hands along curved beams and taking endless notes. One of them turned to Nathan with an expression of genuine astonishment. You built something that withstood a direct hit from an off-season tornado in mountain terrain, she said. Do you understand how remarkable that is? I didn't want it to fail, Nathan replied simply. Failure wasn't an option. Ranger nudged his hand as if reminding him why failure never was. By afternoon, the survivors had set up tents near the cabin. Nathan and Ranger walked among them, checking on the injured, helping distribute supplies, accepting quiet, heartfelt thanks they had never expected to hear. At sunset, Earl gathered the group. His voice trembled, but it carried across the clearing. We lost our homes, he said, but we didn't lose ourselves. We ain't going to let this valley fade away, and we sure as hell ain't going to rebuild it weaker than before. He looked at Nathan, then Ranger. Wind-resistant cabins that stand like this one did. Because one man, one veteran, saw what the rest of us didn't. The survivors murmured their agreement. Nathan felt his throat tighten. Ranger leaned against his leg again, tired but proud. A month later, the first new foundation appeared beside Nathan's cabin, Earl's new home. On its first completed beam, Earl had carved a message with steady hands in honor of the man we once laughed at. Ranger's paw print was pressed into the wood beside it. As summer warmed the Bitterroot Range, 11 new circular cabins rose, each one inspired by Nathan's design, each one blessed by the same determination to never be caught unprepared again. By the following year, the valley had transformed. The university published papers about the Bitterroot round construction, crediting Nathan Hale for rediscovering principles long forgotten. Tourists came to marvel at the uniquely shaped homes. Builders traveled from across the state to learn from Nathan. But the man himself, he preferred quiet evenings on the ridge above his cabin, Ranger lying beside him as the wind brushed gently past the curved walls below. One such evening, Earl climbed the hill and stood beside him. Funny thing, Earl said softly. I used to think a man without corners was a man without sense. He chuckled under his breath. Turns out the round ones endure. Nathan smiled. Sometimes nature tells us what works. We just have to listen. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching in agreement. Below them, the round cabins of Bitterroot Valley glowed in the warm sunset, their curved roofs catching light in a way the old homes never had. A symbol not just of survival, but of wisdom, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a man and the dog who never left his side. Nathan placed a hand on Ranger's back. We made it, buddy. Ranger pressed closer, tail wagging gently. For the first time in years, Nathan Hale felt peace, not the fragile peace of running from the past, but the grounded peace of belonging. And the wind brushing across the valley didn't howl or roar. It flowed smooth, effortless around every curved wall, just as it always had meant to. Before you go, I'd love to know your thoughts. If this story moved you even a little, drop a simple one in the comments. If you'd like to see more stories like this, type 0. Your one click helps the channel grow and brings more veteran and dog stories to life. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in our journey. Thank you for being here. Wherever you're watching from, you're part of this story.